Good morning, good afternoon, buenos días, buenas tardes a todas y todos. My name is John Lindsay-Poland. I coordinate the project Stop U.S. Arms to Mexico of Global Exchange. We welcome all of you today to talk about a number of issues and how they work together and what we can do about them. Um, we know that we are in a moment of unparalleled crisis and violence in the world. We know that the United States and the U.S. arms industry is feeding this crisis on many different levels through large arms and small arms, through policies, through culture, through an unrestricted market that is supplying both legal and illegal actors around the world, including in the United States, that are acting in other countries. Um, in Stop U.S. Arms to Mexico and Global Exchange, we are connected with many different movements who are addressing these issues from many different perspectives, from inside their communities, on policy issues, as researchers, and in different countries. And after the US attack on Venezuela at the beginning of the year, we decided we wanted to begin to connect those dots, connect those issues in ways that enable us to see the relationships between what we're working on, who is being impacted in different ways by violence, because we see that it's often the same firearms, the same weapons that are impacting people in Mexico, in the United States, in Venezuela, in Iran, in Gaza. The United States has a very, very far reach in the world. So we have invited an incredible group today to share with you. We will have time for questions and responses. I encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat in order to just share who you are and where you are if you're with an organization. And also, if you have any questions or comments, to put them in the chat because we will have time during this hour to have conversation and respond to concerns and questions. Um, I want to say just briefly at the start that we in Stop U.S. Arms to Mexico recently published a report called Corridors of Violence, which draws on very detailed data about where firearms in the United States are being purchased and then trafficked to Mexico and to other countries. These include 50 caliber rifles that fire over a mile, can penetrate armor, have downed military helicopters in Mexico, have no real use by civilians in the United States, and yet they are legal to buy in 46 states of the United States. We also were able to document that over the last 2 to 3 years, um, Arizona has become the epicenter of firearms that are purchased with an intent to traffic them to Mexico. And this has been particularly true since in the second half of 2024, violence between cartel groups in Sinaloa erupted after the kidnapping and extradition of one of the cartel leaders. Since that time, we have seen how firearms are growing in trafficking from Arizona down through Sonora, which borders Arizona on the Mexican side, and then down the Pacific coast to Sinaloa, where more weapons were recovered last year than any other Mexican state. And let's be clear, more weapons are recovered in Mexico and traced to U.S. purchases than any other country in the world by far. So the traffic of those weapons is enormous. Um, we can say more about some of these findings after we hear from our panelists. And like I said, we have an incredible array of folks for you. I will introduce folks one by one before they speak. First, with us is Sergio Aguayo, who is a full-time professor at the Center for International Studies at the Colegio de Mexico since 1977. He has a master's and doctorate in international relations from Johns Hopkins University, and since 2014 has coordinated what is known at the Colegio de Mexico as the Seminario sobre Violencia y Paz, the Seminar on Violence and Peace, which has an affiliation and alliance with the Public Health School at Harvard University. Since May 2025 of last year, he has been part as an expert with the platform Depolarization Community of Practice of the Institute for Integrated Transitions. Sergio has written dozens of books and academic articles. He writes and publishes a weekly column in the newspaper Reforma, which is published in 10 other news outlets. So I'll turn it over to you, Sergio, to share with us about the current context in Mexico and observations that you have about it in ways that help us understand how these things are connected.
Muchas gracias, John, y me honra haber sido invitado a este panel con tan distinguidos colegas. Seré muy directo y partiré del tema de las principales vulnerabilidades que tiene el gobierno de Morena, y tiene que ver con una encuesta de opinión que de hecho es la misma que viene desde hace muchos años. El presidente es muy valorado, en este caso la presidenta Claudia Sheinbaum, 72%, pero su estrategia para combatir el crimen y la corrupción recibe un 78% de negativos. Es decir, un lastre de los presidentes mexicanos es que no han sabido cómo responder al reto que plantean los carteles mexicanos y la corrupción mexicana. En este sentido, el análisis creo que, o la situación en México y en la región puede sintetizarse por varios actores. Primero, el crimen organizado. Es notable el tamaño que ha adquirido, en buena medida por la geopolítica, por la cercanía con Estados Unidos. Es uno de los factores principales, no el único. En segundo lugar, un nuevo actor, este es más reciente. El crimen organizado empezó en 1920-21 con la prohibición, fue la consecuencia de la prohibición. Un actor nuevo de este siglo son las grandes tecnológicas, que se han convertido en un actor poderosísimo por varias razones. En términos de la guerra, por que se han convertido en aliados voluntarios e involuntarios, realmente no lo sabemos, del crimen organizado. Y en tercer lugar, el gobierno del presidente Trump, que además de apoyar, tiene una alianza estratégica Trump y las grandes tecnológicas, como bien sabemos, lo cual inhibe al gobierno mexicano de normar, regular, como lo hace Europa, a las tecnológicas, lo cual beneficia al crimen organizado. Es decir, estamos ante un tinglado muy complejo que limita el efecto que está teniendo una estrategia de seguridad mejor de parte de la presidenta. Ahí entraría, por supuesto, el tema de las armas, pero creo que vamos a hablar sobre eso después. Simplemente presento un marco general. Frente a estos actores estarían los actores sociales, entre los que estamos nosotros, los que participamos en este panel, representamos a la sociedad, y me parece que el hecho que estemos mexicanos y estadounidenses ya refleja la manera binacional como estamos manejando, enfrentando el problema de la violencia y la corrupción mexicana y todo lo que está pasando en Estados Unidos. De hecho, en los estudios que hacemos en el seminario sobre violencia y paz, hemos identificado 6 actores fundamentales en la manera como evoluciona el problema. Periodistas, académicos, víctimas, grupos de fe, eh, religiosos, empresarios, creo que ya lo dije, ONGs. Cada uno de estos actores representa diferentes intereses, diferentes agendas, y tiene su propia relación bilateral de una manera muy dispersa. El efecto conjunto de estos actores, los mexicanos y los extranjeros, es que han derrotado el relato gubernamental de que están teniendo éxito en el combate a la corrupción y al crimen organizado. El relato que se impone desde los ochentas es el de la sociedad, periodistas, académicos, en fin. No voy a detener en eso. Luego estaría otros grupos, múltiples grupos que actúan de manera diversa. Ahí metamos a la ultraderecha y al... Ustedes no tienen idea, ¿no? La cantidad de organizaciones que hay en un país con 120 y tantos millones de habitantes y que además tiene, es enorme, una extensión de 2/3 el tamaño de la India. Es decir, somos un país muy grande y muy diverso por múltiples razones. Por tanto, el tipo de organización social, de violencia, de paz, de presencia de Estados Unidos o de influencia de Estados Unidos varía de una a otra región. En esta división de actores, lo que más llama la atención es que la sociedad no está representada por partidos políticos. De hecho, tenemos una relación muy escasa con partidos políticos que en su mayoría forman parte de la corrupción sistémica que aqueja al país, porque a diferencia de otros países, los partidos mexicanos reciben fortunas en prerrogativas del gobierno del Estado mexicano y del gobierno federal y de los 32 estados. Tal vez hay un partido que aún no es legalizado, pero que promete que va a ser diferente. Vamos a ver, Somos México. Y creo que hay que observarlo. No, no va a tener impacto en el corto plazo, pero sí en el mediano plazo. Cierro con un hecho que no está de más enfatizar. En los estudios que he hecho a lo largo de los años, me doy cuenta que estamos ante un sistema regional. Así como la cuenca del Mediterráneo determinó la creación del Imperio Romano para empezar, o del griego en su momento, en el caso de la cuenca del Caribe somos 27 países, cada uno de los cuales tiene un papel diferente en la dimensión criminal, en el flujo de armas, el flujo de drogas, de personas, en fin, de todas aquellas, las arterias que alimentan y conectan a los diferentes países. En ese sentido, pues este tipo de reuniones sirven para recordar la importancia de tener una visión integral, yo diría regional, dentro de la cual los dos principales actores en el tema de seguridad, solamente no en otros, son Estados Unidos y México. Por tanto, lo que hagamos y dejemos de hacer en México va a repercutir y se verá influido por lo que pasa en Cuba, Colombia, Venezuela, América Central, los países de habla inglesa, etcétera, el Caribe, etcétera. Pues ese sería para mí el panorama incierto. Totalmente de acuerdo con John. Es un momento particularmente incierto en el cual es fundamental entender que estamos en una lucha planetaria entre violencia y paz, autoritarismo y democracia, nacionalismos y globalismos, etcétera, que ayuda eh, a grupos como los nuestros o individuos como nosotros a tener una mejor comprensión de las fuerzas en las que estamos participando y en las cuales también somos actores, a veces menores, a veces algo más protagonistas, pero tenemos mucho que decir y tenemos un espacio enorme donde influir y para ello pues el conocimiento ayuda. Pues gracias, John.
Muchas gracias, Sergio. That's really the big picture that we are a part of. It's always so important to remember that we're not just in these specific events in a specific location or a specific moment in history, but they are connected to the challenges of corruption in Mexico, the alliance between Trump and the tech world in the United States, the lack of representation of civil society, and so many of these other regional dynamics that you've outlined for us. Um, For context in the United States, we're turning to Cristina Delgado. Cristina is the national organizing manager at Community Justice. Her involvement in gun violence prevention efforts began after the tragedy at Santa Fe High School, which was the first school shooting in Texas. After that, events in Uvalde, Texas, showed the systemic disparities in responses to these shootings, especially for Black and Brown communities. Christina has built coalitions of survivors to advance legislation to support people affected by gun violence, including a state bill to ensure victim families access to autopsy and medical records, and working with Uvalde families to raise the age for purchasing assault rifles. She's organized survivors to advocate passage of the federal Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. She is also a mother of two and volunteers in her daughter's school district. She is leading Community Justice's efforts to develop and enhance grassroots advocacy in key states. Christina, over to you.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me here, and thank you all for joining in and tuning in. I think that when we're talking about what's happening with our families and communities, across the border, I think we need to really understand what community violence is. Some of those similar root causes that we see here in the United States, we see in other countries. And so I think that that's one of the important things that we need to talk through. We know that when there are disparities in, basic human rights, in basic human needs, we're talking about access to healthcare, access to education, access to, good paying jobs, access to housing. These are all some of those root causes that will allow people to be incentivized to engage in some of these activities that turn violent and end up, with folks catching charges and such. And so that's one of the things that community justice is doing across the country, is linking up with organizations to be able to address those root causes. And I think that it's so incredible for us to be here binationally and to be able to be having these conversations and collaborate together. Me as a Mexicana here in the state of Texas, I'm forever grateful that we have this ability to come together. The other thing we're with talking about the gun trafficking we have seen, coming across the states, I want us to really focus on why these things are being allowed to happen. In so many instances across the country, even more recently here in the state of Texas at Austin, at Buford's, a nightlife spot for a lot of our youth and young people there, were unfortunately gunned down by a AR-15. We have normalized the open carrying, permitless carry of firearms across this country. Not only that, but we have normalized the carrying of weapons of war. Various types of AR-15s, various types of modified firearms to increase capacity, to increase the firepower, and the fatality rates are increasing with that as well. And not only are we, with that being said, just like we are having without these federal blanket legislation, these universal pieces of legislation that protect all states, we have certain states that have certain policies. Some are very strong, have universal background checks, are holding, irresponsible and negligent gun owners accountable. And some states don't have any. In fact, some states are working very hard and tirelessly to continue to open this up, to have anyone have access to these firearms. This is something that we need to be calling out. This is something that we need to be taking to to our legislators, and even more so to our local decision makers and our fellow community members. Um, I want to go back real quick to the normalization of, of these firearms. With us allowing this to continue to happen, what we are now seeing, and we saw recently in Texas, is the continued demonization of our communities of color. Being that a lot of these guns are being trafficked in the states, into some of those communities that don't have access to healthcare, are low income areas, less access to education, and less access to things to be put in their hands when we ask them to put down a firearm. And with that, we're going to continue to see this demonization. We're going to continue to see these influxes of when these occupations are happening of federal agents within our communities, that we're going to see those, our brothers and sisters in these communities of color continue to be detained, to be roughhoused, and to even be their lives taken. So one of the most important things that I think that we really need to focus on is being able to come together, as coalitions, as citizens, but just as human beings, to demand that these changes happen. We have to have the universal background checks. We have to have the violence intervention programming. We have to have the funding for these programs to be able to reach those most at risk of engaging in violence and those most at risk of becoming traffickers. This I don't know if you touched on it yet, John, but we were happy to sign on to the letter that I think is another one of those very important pieces that we have to continue to work on. We have to continue to engage, and I encourage everyone to be a part of that. It's a very strange position that we are all currently in, I think, especially for our Latino communities, even myself myself and my family, as Mexicanas and Mexicanos, to see this destruction, and to see this country of the United States allowing this destruction to continue, of our homelands. Definitely want to always be a resource. I encourage all of you to, keep connected, stay engaged, and stay loud. Stay loud. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina. Your point about the root causes of so much of the violence and the systemic inequalities is something always to keep in mind, a part of the context that we can never forget, even when we're focused in on very specific pieces of this. Those are structural forces that are leading to more and more violence. And your situation in Texas, as you note, is different from some other states within the United States. I often point out to people that if you buy a gun in Texas, it is more likely to be used in a homicide in Mexico than in a homicide in Texas. Um, and so we can't really see that trade without looking across the borders and the ways in which the inequities are being reproduced within the country, each of our countries, as well as internationally. Next we are going to, and I do again invite people to put questions or comments in the chat, in order to so we can have a fuller conversation in the latter part of this hour. But now I want to introduce Grace Fernandez Moran. Grace is the sister of Dan Jaramil Fernandez, who was forcibly disappeared in the state of Coahuila in 2008. Grace is the director of outreach for Buscando Desaparecidos Mexico, looking for disappeared Mexico, or Búscame, and a member of the movement for our disappeared in Mexico, el movimiento por nuestros desaparecidos, in Mexico and a human rights specialist with a focus on victims' rights. She holds a master's in human rights and constitutional guarantees from the Inter-American Academy of Human Rights at the Autonomous University of Coahuila. Thank you, Grace, for being with us, and go ahead.
Gracias, un gusto, gracias por el espacio. Eh, Como víctima o familiar de una persona desaparecida en México, pues la preocupación porque sí en incremento la incidencia es muchísima. Estamos hablando de que nosotras tenemos más de 17 años buscando a mi hermano, construyendo de la mano de los gobiernos las políticas públicas para atender la desaparición de personas y aún así en México hoy en día desaparecen aproximadamente 49 personas diarias. 49 personas diarias es un autobús escolar, solo para tener una dimensión. En este país en donde hay más de 140,000 personas desaparecidas, únicamente hay 141 sentencias por desaparición. Es decir, una por cada 1,000, ¿no? Más o menos. Y el problema es que no solamente son los desaparecidos, también son los fallecidos no identificados. La presidenta ha presumido con bombos y platillos que han disminuido los índices de homicidios dolosos y nosotros hemos levantado la mano para decir, hey, sí, disminuyen los homicidios dolosos, pero voltea a verla a los desaparecidos. Van en incremento, si bien han reducido cerca de 30 personas fallecidas o asesinadas, este incremento de 15, 20 personas desaparecidas, más los fallecidos no identificados, que como no saben si los restos que se encuentran son de seres humanos o de animales, no los cuantifican. Nadie habla de los casi 80,000 muertos no identificados como parte de ese índice o de ese porcentaje de homicidios dolosos, ¿no? Y como hemos comentado en otras ocasiones, las personas desaparecen porque las obligan a desaparecer. No es que se vayan voluntariamente, aunque hay situaciones en donde la forma en que los grupos criminales operan es mediante invitaciones a trabajar. La gente se mueve, como en el caso de Teuchitlán, que llegan a ciudades en busca de un trabajo y resulta que es el crimen organizado obligándolos a trabajar. Y entonces, de forma voluntaria, se ausentan de sus hogares, pero no permanecen de forma voluntaria. ¿Y cómo es que los hacen mantenerse fuera de la familia, fuera de la protección de la ley? Pues a punta de armas. Y es parte de lo que hemos dicho. Los desaparecidos no se van, los desaparecen y los permanecen desaparecidos porque los grupos criminales están fuertemente armados. Una muestra del poder de fuego, pues fue lo ocurrido a principios a finales del mes de febrero, cuando se dio la detención y asesinato del líder del cártel Jalisco Nueva Generación, el conocidísimo Osegueda, alias El Mencho, en donde sale el cártel a generar estas olas de violencia, de terror en varias ciudades del país con un gran arsenal de armas. Y la pregunta es, ¿y de dónde vienen? ¿No? Y ahí vuelvo a lo que mencionaron ya Sergio y Cristina, lo que es el origen. O sea, no se trata nada más de decir los cárteles tienen muchas armas. En México no producimos armas. En México la compra de armas no es como que vas al súper y que sea tu derecho tener un arma. Solamente el ejército está facultado y para que tú puedas tener un permiso para portar armas tienes que hacer un trámite súper complejo y costoso. Y entonces, ¿de dónde salen esas armas? Pues es parte del intercambio que hacen los grupos criminales con quienes compran sus drogas. Entonces, las drogas a cambio de armas y de dinero es parte del negocio criminal. Las armas es únicamente una herramienta para que ellos puedan proveer las drogas que se consumen en Estados Unidos. Y Estados Unidos, a cambio, no solamente pagan las drogas, les facilitan los medios para la producción. Y ese es las armas con las que protegen el negocio y garantizan que puedan atravesar las fronteras. Y entonces, si no atacamos los problemas de raíz, lo único que va a pasar, así como hoy en día la preocupación acá en México es cortas una cabeza como la del Mencho y salen 5 o 6. La célula o el cártel se va a dividir entre los líderes más poderosos que siguen teniendo las redes criminales, las armas, el dinero, las influencias para poder seguir operando sus líneas de trabajo. Ahora, no es solamente el consumo de drogas, hay que estar bien claros. La trata de personas con fines de explotación sexual, pero también con fines de trabajo forzado no pagado. También el tema de la venta de órganos clandestino. Y vamos, si los problemas estructurales no se empiezan a atacar de raíz, tanto de este lado, no solamente hablando de México, sino de Centro y Sudamérica, en donde se elaboran las drogas, pero aprovechándose de las condiciones económicas de las personas, en donde no hay oportunidades de trabajo, donde no hay oportunidades de educación, en donde es más fácil que la juventud encuentre un ingreso trabajando para estos grupos delincuenciales que un trabajo digno que pague malísimo por 10 12 horas de trabajo físico extenuante, ¿no? Pero también del otro lado, o sea, hemos visto con preocupación la insistencia del presidente Trump de venir a acabar con los cárteles de la droga, pero de aquel lado no se ve la política pública de cómo combatir el consumo de la droga, porque podrán venir a invadir México y terminar con los cárteles, pero los cárteles se van a retraer a Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Colombia, y va a seguir la producción porque mientras haya consumo, mientras haya una demanda de la droga, va a seguir habiendo quien la produzca. Entonces, es de la mano, ¿no? Y de ahí el llamado a hacer justo estas sinergias de cómo podemos generar estrategias regionales para combatir los problemas estructurales de raíz, ¿no? México ha sido un país sumamente examinado por los mecanismos internacionales, llámese la Comisión Interamericana, la Corte Interamericana, el mecanismo de ONU que quieran, todos han venido, todos han dado sus recomendaciones muy valiosas, pero cuando tienes un gobierno como el de la Cuarta Transformación o Morena aquí en México, que dice, yo sé cómo hacer, no necesito que los eh, mecanismos internacionales me digan cómo hacer, y la comunidad internacional fuera de decir, oye, pues, pero da resultados, empieza más bien a cuestionar los mecanismos internacionales, eso no ayuda. Entonces, ¿cómo desde la sociedad civil nos reagrupamos para pensar, entonces, ahora qué toca hacer? Toca ir a los gobiernos de Estados Unidos a decir, oye, a ver, una cosa es que quieras ayudar y otra que no estés viendo los problemas que tienes en casa, que son los que originan a su vez que en mi hogar se generen estos eh, temas de violencia y sufrimiento, ¿no? Entonces, la invitación para que sigamos construyendo, porque a las víctimas en México se nos están acabando las opciones, ¿no? Eh, Hoy en día sigue en examinación bajo el amparo del artículo 34 de la Convención contra la Desaparición de Personas de Naciones Unidas. Sin embargo, pues aparte que no hay un procedimiento, el tema de Trump tratando de hacer su versión de la ONU con su grupo de aliados en Centro y Sudamérica, no nos ayuda a justo el enfoque internacional del deber ser, del derecho internacional, de los derechos ganados y construidos a fuerza de sufrimiento en muchos lados del mundo, para decir, oye, ¿qué más vas a hacer? Hoy en día, Naciones Unidas, sí lo siento un tanto cuanto disminuido por Estados Unidos, y no sé qué tan sano puede hacer eso, ¿no? El negar el disminuir la capacidad de incidencia de una organización tan importante que históricamente ha sido quien señala a los estados, estás mal en esto, estás mal en esto otro, y qué vas a hacer para solucionarlo. Entonces, yo creo que es un momento crucial para pensar fuera de la caja y nuevas estrategias de cómo, eh, pues, trabajar ambos lados, insisto, no se trata solamente de acabar con los grupos criminales, porque mientras no haya un desmantelamiento financiero, un desmantelamiento logístico real de la capacidad de los cárteles y sobre todo, mientras no haya combate al consumo, que es lo que da el origen a estos temas, va a ser un círculo vicioso que difícilmente vamos a lograr romper. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Grace, por esa exposición. You really show us how urgent it is that civil society act and find ways to connect at a time when our governments are not fulfilling what they need to do, or even in the case of the United States, saying, "Well, yeah, we want to help you, but the way we're going to help you is with a military invasion by taking on the cartels with our military." Um, but then, the Mexican government saying, "Oh no, we don't need these UN structures to monitor and support on human rights." So, making all the more important action on collaboration between um, the civil societies across our borders, and finding ways that civil societies can really engage states, both the United States and Mexico, to get some movement, as well as what we can do ourselves. Um, we're now going to turn to Ben Dooley, who has conducted an incredible journalistic investigation of the production of 50 caliber bullets that are used and in fact, by both state forces and by organized crime in Mexico, as part of Barrett 50 caliber rifles that are especially desired for combat, but are easily available for sale. Ben is a reporter for the International Consortium of Independent Journalists, based in Washington. He covered Asia for over a decade, started as a reporter in Washington and Beijing for Kyoto News of Japan. Spent 3 years in China with Agence France Presse before he was in Tokyo, and was also a business correspondent for the New York Times. He's fluent in Mandarin and Japanese, has a master's degree in East Asian Studies from Stanford, and a bachelor's in Asian Studies from the University of Virginia. So I turn it over to you, Ben.
Thanks, John. I appreciate the invitation, and it's great to be here with everyone today. So I guess the first question is, why am I here? After spending 10 years in Asia, my expertise is primarily in that region, but about 3 years ago, I moved back to the US to work for the New York Times on investigations. And one of the things I was assigned to do was look at the business of guns here in the United States. And very quickly, we came to the realization that a lot has been written about the guns themselves, but very little has been written about the ammunition that fuels those guns. And, as an ATF agent said to me not so long ago, without ammunition, a gun is just an expensive hammer. One of the things that we found very quickly, which I think is interesting and led to our later investigation to Mexico, is that surprisingly, the majority of the ammunition for assault weapons that's made in the United States is manufactured by the U.S., not by the U.S. Army, but manufactured on U.S. Army property by a contractor that provides most of the ammunition for the U.S. Army. So when you talk about an AR-15, most of the ammunition for the AR-15, at least 30% to 40% of the ammunition, maybe as much as 50%, is made in this government plant called Lake City, which is in Kansas, just outside of Kansas City in Missouri. And that was kind of a starting revelation, because it pointed to something that I think people had thought about a little bit, but hadn't really understood the full extent of, which is the extent to which the American government subsidizes the market for and the production of ammunition for assault weapons. John mentioned the 50 caliber weapon, 50 caliber rifle, which is most popularly made by Barrett. It's a particularly interesting case. As you know, AR-15s are very popular in the US. People use them for lots of different things, mostly target practice. Obviously, people claim to use them for home defense, sometimes hunting. They are used in a lot of high profile crimes, of course, in the US. 50 caliber rifles are quite interesting to me because they have, as John said, no civilian application, but they don't in the US even really have a criminal application. It's very rare, almost unheard of for a 50 caliber rifle to be used in a crime in the United States. So what's interesting, of course, is that they're used quite frequently in Mexico. And it's become a huge problem. And one of the things that we discovered as we were looking into the production of AR-15 ammunition at this plant, this Army-owned plant, is that they also were producing quite a lot of 50 caliber ammunition. And the 50 caliber ammunition, the plant under a company called ATK began producing that ammunition in around 2008 and for civilian sale. So up to that point, it had been mostly sold to the Army, used by the Army and to other governments. But in 2008, around that time, the US government struck a deal with the contractor that was running this facility that allowed them to sell to civilian distributors and retailers. And the idea was that this was going to save the US government money by allowing the company to sell commercial ammunition. The US government would get a discount on the ammunition it sold. And additionally, there were concerns about keeping the plant running constantly in case there was need for ammunition. So the idea was that there was a burgeoning market for ammunition in the US and for civilians. And if this company was allowed to sell that ammunition to civilians, then it would ensure that the plant was running 24/7 and would be able to fulfill whatever need that the US Army would have, when it wasn't fighting a war, for example. If there was a war that wasn't on and demand for ammunition was low, they wanted to ensure that the plants were constantly running. So what we discovered in our reporting is that the US Army had become one of the few sources of bulk ammunition, 50 caliber ammunition to the civilian market. Now, the only people who were really using 50 caliber ammunition were hobbyists in the US. 50 caliber rifles are very expensive. They can range, the cheapest model you can get is about $2,000 for a single shot bolt action rifle, and they go up to $20,000, $30,000. An average rifle might cost $7,000 or $8,000. So it's a pretty small community of people who were using this, and they were typically buying their ammunition from manufacturers that were making and selling, 10 round packs, 50 round packs, whereas the Army ammunition was being sold in 150 round cans, could be sold in thousands, in the thousands. And what we discovered is that that ammunition was being sold primarily through ammunition dealers in Arizona and Texas, although in some other parts of the country as well, to straw purchasers who were then smuggling it into Mexico, where it was being used in a variety of attacks on civilians and the government. ATF did a report on this, and they found that at least 7 government helicopters had been brought down by 50 caliber ammunition, almost certainly from Lake City. And by our own count, I think we had there are 87 attacks since 2003 that used 50 caliber rifles. And given the time period, almost certainly it was all made at this government plant. Now, there are 2 other manufacturers of bulk 50 caliber ammunition. One is a South Korean company, and one is a Brazilian company. But those are really the only 3 companies that produce it. And the Mexican government, after our report came out, said that I believe over 50% of the ammunition that they have seized, 50 caliber ammunition they have seized came from this plant, the Lake City plant owned by the U.S. Army. So I think it's really important to think about the U.S. government's role in subsidizing the industry, and it goes, in my opinion, beyond ammunition. It also goes to the weapons that are being used. Some of the most popular military-style rifles were either developed for the military or have more recently been made with designed with funding from the U.S. military before they were sold in the civilian market. And a lot of those are, of course, coming from the U.S. to Mexico, where they're popular with cartels. One thing that was kind of interesting to me is, it doesn't seem like ammunition is a difficult problem in the U.S. because there aren't really any federal regulations about selling rifle ammunition. Anyone over the age of 18, with very few exceptions, can buy it in pretty much any quantity. One of the things that we found was that handgun ammunition, there's some restrictions on the type of ammunition that can be sold. For example, armor-piercing ammunition can't be sold, generally speaking. But when it's rifle ammunition, anything goes. So one thing we were finding is that there were tens of thousands of rounds of this armor-piercing ammunition, which is exclusively made at Lake City, that were going across the border. They were being sold at from these bulk ammo dealers. One thing about ammunition too that's important to note is that unlike guns, if you only sell ammunition, you don't have to get any kind of federal license to sell it. So if you're a gun shop that sells ammunition, of course you have to be federally licensed. But if you sell exclusively ammunition, there are no requirements for licensure. So pretty much anyone can sell it. And it's an interesting situation now. The people who are straw purchasers who are moving this ammunition to Mexico, they are helping move this ammunition to Mexico. There are very few penalties for them. There's really no way to prosecute them, meaningful way to prosecute them. Typically, they'll just get a slap on the wrist. So it's created a situation where people can pretty much move huge quantities of ammunition with impunity across the border. And of course, that isn't just limited to 50 caliber ammunition. A much larger problem is 5.56 and 7.62 ammunition, which would be used in AR-15s and AK-47s, respectively. We've seen shipments of hundreds of thousands of rounds being seized by the ATF, and they estimate that probably there are tens of millions of rounds going across the border every year. One thing that I just think is interesting is that the U.S. manufactures millions of guns a year, but it literally manufactures billions of rounds of ammunition. This U.S. Army plant alone is manufacturing between 300 million to 1 billion rounds of ammunition a year for the civilian market. The country just flooded with it, and there really haven't been, I think, any serious attempts to try to curb its flow into Mexico. So I'll keep it short, leave it there. Happy to answer any questions people might have.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's true that ammunition, partly because it's so unregulated, gets very little attention, and yet there's many guns, both in the United States and Mexico, already out in our communities. They can't function without bullets, but the bullets tend to be invisible. So thank you so much, Sergio, Christina, Grace, and Ben. We do have one question from Arnie Alpert in the chat about whether there's been hearings about the Lake City ammo production center in either of the House or Senate Armed Services. Arnie is from New Hampshire and has congressional representatives on both of those committees. I'm not aware of any hearing that they've held.
There haven't been hearings. Elizabeth Warren and some other folks have introduced a bill, I think last week, that is going to attempt to stop the sale of Lake City ammunition to civilians. I think it's unlikely that anything will happen with that. One issue with it is the facility is kind of a black box. I know there have been numerous requests from Congress about for more information about commercial sales from the facility, and DoD has pretty much just stonewalled them. So it's not entirely clear what is actually going on there. We were able to dig up some data about it from confidential sources, but none of it's public.
Right. So it's sort of prohibiting it, maybe congressional action could get some more information about it.
Mm.
Stephen Hargarten says we need to change the narrative from guns don't kill people,
Mm.
people kill people to a narrative guns don't kill people, bullets kill people. So I want to close us out with a question for each of you. You've each presented some large contexts, and we know that at this moment, right now, in both Mexico and the United States and beyond, there are so many things happening. Most of them, if you open up your news feed, it can be very overwhelming. Especially, I think, if you're in the United States, but I assume in Mexico as well. So my question for each of you, you are activists, you're writer, researcher, doing advocacy, working on specific cases of things. In this particular moment, when there's so many different things going on, I'm wondering if each of you might take a minute and just say, how do you prioritize in this moment of what you're going to work on or how you're going to work on it? Because I think that's something that many people are struggling with. So anybody who wants to start. Sergio, you're unmute yourself. You need to unmute Sergio.
I'm sorry. I always write for society. So I think what is of interest for society this week, I write every week. And I don't write for the government. I always think so. I adapt the language to society, to different groups. Second, I select a topic that is in the arena in the moment, and then I surround it with history, the context, the future, and new information all the time. And then I subject the text to different experts, including a colleague that the gender language is very important, the sensibility. So I try to, I listen to her advice too. Sometimes I made a mistake with the way, the adjective I am using. So it's fascinating, complicated, but I think very useful process, weekly process.
Yeah, great. Grace, Cristina, Ben, how do you choose? ¿Cómo escogen lo que van a trabajar?
Well, I can go. I'm not, as a journalist, I'm not an activist, of course, but I think we all can agree that reducing gun violence and illegal trafficking is a goal that everyone holds in common. And I think that what we're trying to do is when we think about our investigations, we always try to think about what could have the most potential impact. And I think that's a combination of, what will the public find interesting and what could result in as a reasonable chance of resulting in change. So I mean, those are the two factors that I really consider when we really consider when we think about projects. And of course, we write about a wide range of things, not just guns. But yeah, I mean.
So
Yeah.
Sergio and Ben, as writers and journalists, are sort of looking at what is of public interest at the moment. Cristina, Grace, ¿ustedes cómo escogen lo que van a priorizar en el momento?
Y si me permites, entonces, pues justo, o sea, yo no soy ni periodista y me llaman activista, pero yo soy una persona que busca un ser amado, ¿no? Yo busco a mi hermano porque lo amo, porque me hace falta, porque mi mamá, mi familia, sus hijos, nos hace falta en la vida. Entonces, hay organizaciones, haya condiciones políticas, condiciones de paz, o no los haya, yo voy a seguir buscándolo. Nosotras no tenemos opción. Tenemos que trabajar con lo que hay y construir lo que no hay para poder encontrarles. Entonces, aun cuando las condiciones globales están sumamente complejas para cualquier cosa. Les decía yo a las organizaciones que siempre nos han acompañado en México, yo empecé sin un peso, sigo trabajando sin ni un peso y no necesito un peso para exigir que se le busque a mi hermano y a todos los demás desaparecidos. Entonces, para mí las condiciones siempre han sido difíciles, pero como decimos nosotros en una de nuestras más importantes consignas, los buscamos porque los amamos. Ese es nuestro impulso, esa es nuestra motivación y ese es nuestro financiamiento infinito, porque el amor no se nos acaba. Y desde esa perspectiva, parte de lo que hemos tratado de hacer en estos tiempos tan violentos, en donde si bien se ve un poco más los alcances de la violencia, los alcances de este fuerte armamento que está en la calle y en manos de personas malas, la realidad es que no trastoca tu vida hasta que se llevan a alguien, ya sea que lo maten o lo desaparezcan. Pero lo que sí es más fácil entender es justo eso, el amor. Y entonces desde el amor estamos tratando de decirle a la sociedad civil, entiende que mi hermano era un ser maravilloso con 1000 defectos, pero que era un excelente padre, que le hace falta a 5 niños que han crecido con esa ausencia tan importante en su vida. Ayúdame a que no haya más niños que tengan que crecer con esas ausencias. Ayúdame a que más vidas no sean tan trastocadas, que pierdan oportunidades, que deja tú que perdamos médicos, ingenieros, contadores. Vamos a crear generaciones que siguen viendo al narcotráfico como una opción de vida. Y eso no es sano. Entonces, lo que estamos tratando de construir justo es esa red, porque volvemos a que todas las luchas se ganan con la unidad, con la fuerza de la unión. Y si la sociedad civil no entiende que se tiene que unir antes de que tenga que estar aquí, pues algún día van a estar de este lado y los vamos a recibir con los brazos abiertos, pero no queremos que sufran la desaparición o el asesinato de un miembro para que puedan empezar a trabajar en cómo construir procesos de justicia y paz. Sería
Mm.
acuerdo.
Gracias, Grace. Es eso, ¿no? Es que el amor nos guía para priorizar. Y no solamente el amor que sentimos para nuestros amados, sino también el amor de otras personas que también tienen mucho valor. Cristina, si nos puedes cerrar, Cristina, if you can close us out with your thought on this question.
Man, it's hard to go after Grace. Muchas gracias, Grace, for your words. Um, as someone who comes from community and a community of survivors and's been affected by gun violence, I prioritize the people. I prioritize the people. Each and every one of us who has had some experience in some capacity have now become credible messengers. We know the pain, we know the ripple effects, we know how our community, how our families, how our situations were prior to that act of violence, how we felt in that moment of violence, and we can now see the solutions to these acts of violence. And so it really starts in the foundation of community. And in, being able to sit and listen to understand, not listen to respond. We know that the bigger picture is to get these changes. We know that the bigger picture is to change legislation so that we can save lives, not in one community, but in all communities, and even beyond that, across our entire continent, across all of the Americas. And I think that once we have the ability to do that, to listen, to connect, it is what fuels me to continue doing this work. It can be very daunting. You could be told no a million times, but I almost feel like if we pull back some of that childhood courage where no was never the answer, we would be able to continue this battle to the end, to be able to have communities where we can live amongst each other. Our children are not going to school practicing for their massacre, where we don't have to fear that our families traveling back and forth across the border will have to endure acts of violence. And we can ensure that whatever changes we make can be passed on to future generations, as opposed to us continuing to pass on trauma, which we know is one of those major ripple effects. And my call to action, I think, to everyone is each of your state houses, each of your city councils, your county offices, and even there on Capitol Hill. Those are all the people's house, and we are people.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Christina. I think that's a fantastic way to end, with love and people and their value are what guide us in all that we do. Thank you, Sergio, Grace, Christina, and Ben, for your incredible presence and presentations. Thank you, everyone who participated. We will send out a recording of this and as well as contacts for more information. Be well, hang in there, and stay in community.